We're going to be talking today about the work that we've produced as part of one of our work packages. Very important to the topics that we've got today with Black History Month, and specific introduction to some of those nuanced details around mental health, well-being and so forth for our Black students. The structure today, we'll move back to Patrice in a moment. I'm going to give a bit of the slightly duller overview of the hierarchy of policies and how we've established things to get to the important work that we're going to be covering in the more interesting parts with Manny, Khadija and Grace a little bit later. So Manny will talk through the research overview, the work that we did in terms of working with staff. Khadija will talk about some of our suggestions for and how we inform future conversations with students. Grace will then talk about the recommendations, and then we'll move back to Patrice. We'll open up a discussion of the presentation that we've had. So I will just skip over Patrice's bit. I'm just going to take you through this hierarchy that talks about how we've come to focus on this specific issue. I could have actually put another slide on top of here which talks about the Access, Participation, Success strategy, which is a 4-nation strategy and provides some of the foundations for the work that's taken place, including the Access and Participation Plan. Hopefully most of you have heard about that and know what it is, but a quick run through to remind you or to introduce to some colleagues. The Access and Participation Plan is an arrangement that we have with the Office for Students in England, but it's central to the university across its 4 nations because of the core elements that it contains, and I'll just describe that in a moment. It sets out our ambition to provide change. It articulates what that change will be. It sets key targets. We have a small number of those targets. I'll talk about some of those in a moment, but we do need to very much directly see change. And then it talks about how we're going to invest money. And for the university to be able to set some higher fees, we need to dedicate a large percentage of that money towards actions and activities that support students from underrepresented groups. We also expand that into disadvantaged groups, and we are also currently using the term as well, discriminated against groups. But in terms of the language for the Office for Students, it's about underrepresented groups. Now, if we don't have a plan that is successful, we fall foul of a number, or can fall foul of a number of things. In terms of non-compliance, there are financial penalties which may come up. We may have conditions imposed. It's a bit like a school being in special measures that may come upon us, which would include enhanced monitoring. We may ultimately have our registration to be a university turned down. There are also implications for students accessing student loans to be able to study with us. So it's really important. We had our Access and Participation Plan submitted and agreed at the end part of 2019. Recently, we've had to submit monitoring arrangements in terms of the success that we're making, and thankfully Office for Students are happy in terms of how we've explained where we are, but we do have a number of really critical targets, and we need to make some progress on those. Before I move on to the next slide, which talks about the specific target in terms of mental health declarations by our Black students, just to highlight a couple of other targets. The OU has currently and has consistently over a number of years had an awarding gap between Black and white students achieving what we call, or is described as, good passes. That's the equivalent of a 2-1 or a first at levels 2 and 3 at the end of a module. We've had a gap in excess of 30 percentage points. We're not the only university in the sector. In fact, most of them have fairly significant gaps, but we need to make some progress there. We also need to make progress in terms of attracting more Black and Asian students, but we're also looking at other targets around disability, students in households within areas of high deprivation, for example. But this has also led us to one of our specific targets that we've called out within the Access and Participation Plan put to the Office for Students around the mental health declarations by Black students. It's that important part about the intersectionality, how it's not just an additional, it's a multiplier effect here. But we know from the research in putting together the original Access and Participation Plan, the APP, that there was a gap in terms of students declaring. We've got 3% of our Black students declare mental health difficulties compared to 5.1% of our white students. We suspect both groups could and would be a lot higher than both of those numbers, but that gap of 2.1 percentage points we're trying to eradicate through some of our work here. That was set in 2017-18. Actually, by 2018-19, the figures have gone up to 2.4 percentage points. So we really need to urgently address this, which is why the Task and Finish group has been established. Now, it's one of a number of Task and Finish groups looking at other areas within the APP. We had specific groups looking at progression, student recruitment, peer mentoring, personal learning advisors, carers, care experience, and the inclusive curriculum tool, developing and rolling that out. I know that lots of you will have been aware and probably involved in some of those other pieces of work. They're moving forward, but we first established our Task and Finish group just over a year ago. It's chaired by Bahana Awan. I helped to facilitate the group, but we bring together colleagues from across the university. So there's diversity in terms of the level of staff that we've got involved. There's some diversity in terms of across the different parts of the organisation, but there's also very much diversity in terms of ethnicity of the colleagues that have made up this group. And I think that diversity within the group really enhances it as it does across the whole of the university. Diversity is what we need. So within the Task and Finish group, we set up a number of work package groups to help us address some of the points. We have one looking at baselining data because we had inconsistent data and trying to get behind some of those numbers. We've also been looking at the OU context, policy and procedures and how that can make students more successful or produce challenges for certain students from certain groups, particularly here, Black students with mental health difficulties. We've undertaken a couple of pieces of scholarship, one working with students, and today we're going to learn a bit more about the work with staff. We're also looking at creating various resources to support staff and students to engage in this area more effectively. We're looking to evaluate the area, and then we've got our language and communications work package group, which is the group that's presenting back to you today. Just very broadly, it's been led fantastically by Khadija, who you'll hear more from later. General objectives, we're trying to look at the language and terminology that our Black staff use when talking about mental health conditions, because trying to understand some of those cultural impacts is really important. But also to bring to the fore that there are nuances and differences, and we can't just present one approach to talking about mental health and well-being to all students. So we have been drawing upon the scholarship internally and across the sector. We're now here to inform and disseminate. We're looking towards putting together some other materials that you'll find access to, but our work has come from surveys and further interviews that we will hear more from our colleagues in a moment. I just wanted to highlight as well that on the 13th of December, we'll be going through more depth about all of the things that our Task and Finish group have done. I will put a link in the chat later to allow you to book onto that seminar. 13th of December. It's going to be internal and external, running from 10 till 12. That's the end of my part. I've covered the general what we're going to cover today, Patrice. Would you like to take people through your own personal story?
Yeah, sure. I think it was really important. Well, I thought it was really important for me to add this little intersection inside of this presentation so that you understand why we were doing it specifically for Black students. Basically, my name is Patrice Belton. I am the Vice President for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the OU Students Association. And I'm also an OU alumni. And my story, basically, before we get into the rest of the presentation, is I believe that this project matters for Black students because I am a Black presenting Caribbean woman, and the intersectionalities within that already renders this story uneasy. However, living with a mental health challenge, which is often stigmatized and perceived in my culture as a dirty word, shame, brokenness, lack, or any other of those type words, can be disabling in itself. I was silenced by my experiences when I first came to the uni. Having no role model or examples as well to relate to really challenged me in terms of coming forward. So how I see this is, if you don't see yourself represented in the people around you, you're less likely to feel safe, you're less likely to be comfortable or to be put in the spotlight. So you often don't try to do that. You know, you don't try to go forward because, yeah, it's challenging. Also, I also realized that when I was doing that, I wasn't necessarily looking for hope. I wasn't looking for any of the, I don't know how to put that, but it was just hard. It was a hard, very hard time. And if you think about visiting a foreign country, when you go to a foreign country for the first time, not knowing the language, not knowing the people, you do tend to feel lost, don't you? In plain sight, at least. And you panic first. You don't think about contingencies. You don't think about making, effective plans. You don't rationalize on, oh my God, how am I going to save myself right now? So I think that's where a lot of students are coming from when we're looking at why they don't report often enough, Still, sometimes you have to be an exception, and that's what I see myself as. So I, became a vice president for equality, diversity, and inclusion to help along, students in that way. You have to be the exception, like I said. You have to rub against what's comfortable in desperate times to get help. My dad falling ill with cancer and me hitting a very low point in the middle of my studies was what caused me to reach out, was what caused me to, look for a platform, look for someone to help me. And the role that I'm in now after doing that, which connected me to support, connected me to the student disability team, etc., helped me to have that platform. It helped me to open my voice. And I didn't know that they were here. And I think a lot of students feel the same. They don't know that it's here. And that's our challenge. So to witness the OU's internal structures in this role has really also been such a massive gift for me. And it's also given me the opportunity to inform and influence and bring the hope and change that I hope to see. So I feel like it's so important for us to let students know, and staff as well, that that's why this matters. I am the target, can't speak English. I am the target audience. My voice matters, my contribution matters, and my lived experiences matters. And that's why we wanted to put my little bit in here. So I'm now going to hand over to our next presenter for the day, and that's going to be Dr. Emmanuel Nartey. So he's also the lecturer in law in the School of Law in the Faculty of Business and Law.
Thanks, Patrice, and thanks, Darren, for an amazing initial presentation, and also to bringing the team together for us to do this fantastic work. I think it's very important in this time that we start talking about these issues and find a way to address it. So it's been an honor to work with you guys. So thanks for the opportunity as well. So as my colleagues have been highlighting, the main aim is to find out what are the gaps, and if there is any, how can we fill these gaps. So when I joined the team, the research, we decided to expand on the research ideas, and also in order to do that, we need to understand the foundation of the problem and what has been written and what other people are talking about as well. It's very important. So what we decided to do is to try to focus on the appropriate language and terminology that can be used by students and staff in terms of when we are talking about Black students, how are they going to declare mental health using specific language, or how are we going to approach them using different specific language that they can relate to. So that was the aim, and then that diverged into different resources and finding out what is happening on the ground and what other people are talking about. So we conducted a literature review, and the aim was to research the current mental health state of Black people in HE environment. And when we did that, also we wanted to find out how students and staff in the HE environment feels about declaring mental health declaration, and if there is any stigma attached. What is the perception? What is the current notion of mental health in this current climate? So that's what the literature review, the current research that was done previously is about. Then from there, we shift our focus into conducting online survey, which we invited 25 participants, but only 11 responses. However, we did follow up in order to prompt the participant and also to look at the discrepancies, if there is any way for them to elaborate on what the answers of the survey. It's very, very important for us, because we were thinking the more loopholes we can cover, the better the understanding is about of the situation that is happening on the ground. So we follow up with interviews, and these interviews, we had 8 participants engaging with us. So when we look at the previous research, what has been done, what other authors are talking about, and when we also look at our own research finding, we came to the conclusion that how do we make sense out of these fragmented issues that people are talking about, and how do we bring it together in order to find different themes that gel together. And it was amazing, because what we saw in our research and also what we saw in the publication that has already been done cannot be disputed. It was absolutely clear that there is a problem in HE environment among both staff and also Black students declaring mental health. So when we are looking at the issue internally at the Open University, and I must make it clear that our research, the participant we interviewed were not students, so our research did focus on that aspect. So we initially prompted the participant to find out what are some of the languages they could use, how do they feel in the work at the Open University, and is there a safe environment for them to declare mental health, and if in general the overall view or perception of the society that they live in has also contributed to them declaring or not declaring mental health. And it was initially it was striking, because what we saw and the theme that was coming out is institutional inequality. So most Black staff didn't feel that there is a safe environment for them to declare mental health. And they also feel that there is an institutional perception, general perception about Black people, make them very reluctant to declare mental health. And this also tied into them and the institution not understanding their cultural background, their situation, how to communicate with them. So there is this traditional approach from the institution that believe that when you're a Black person, you are automatically, or you can be automatically categorized in this or put in this category. And what they did by doing that is they did alienate most of the people who have mental health issues in order to come forward to declare mental health. So that was quite an interesting finding. And there was also an issue with transparency. People fear that when they declare mental health, what will be the consequences? Are they going to be labeled as this colleague causing the problem? Or are they going to be labeled as someone who has a mental health issue and may take a long-term sick? That was an issue and this ties into what we mean by the safe working environment, because the perception from the participant feel that there is no safe working environment for them to declare mental health. They fear for the transparency aspect because there will be consequences after. So that was another interesting finding. There was also culture barrier, which we found, and this culture barriers has two aspects to it. The first part is the participant talking about their cultural background may also have an effect on their mental declaration, because the word mental health in itself has problematic aspect to it if they wanted to declare it. So they cannot declare mental health because of this cultural barriers. However, there's also cultural barriers in the institution as well. So it's a two-dimensional views. So in the institution has also created an internal cultural barriers that make it difficult for them to declare mental health. So effectively, to want to think of a better way to put it, they've been screwed from both sides, really. They have their own background issue that they have to deal with, and also they have the institutional issue that we have to deal with. And the other part which I saw was, for me, was quite interesting, and the group as well, is confidentiality. So because they didn't feel there is a safe working environment, confidentiality become very important. So they are not sure if they declare mental health, how is it going to be treated? Will it be confidential? Will it affect the employment? And all boil down to that fundamental point of not having a transparency and safe environment that encourage Black people to declare mental health. Okay, so this is where I will pass it to the next presenter to talk in depth about, which is Khadija, to talk in depth about the OU perspective and what advice that are coming out from this research. So Khadija, over to you, please.
Thanks, Manny. The survey and interviews with OU Black staff were invaluable, as this helped us to start to consider the use of appropriate language and the type of resources we should be looking to for us to work supportively with Black students. Very much from the outset, we agreed that the resources we developed would be set within the context of person-first language or person-centered language. Person-first language or person-centered language is a strength-based approach used by health and social care practitioners and which is supported by people with disabilities as good practice. We chose this approach as it engages and encourages conversation by respecting the person's identity and self-image foremost, and by using empathetic language provides a safe place for Black students at the OU to start conversations about their mental health. These on this slide are our initial thoughts on what the resource could cover, which will be handed over to the resources work package to develop further. The resources should lay out what Manny covered earlier: poor communication, university perception, etc. An understanding of these are required to hold conversation with Black students. And the following quotes in the slide, as you can see, provides the context background when developing resources. I'm just going to read out one slide. No one wants to admit their feelings, and with an individual from a BME background, this is much more difficult, as they're expected to overcome everything no matter what, as no natural sympathy is afforded through their background, expectations placed upon them are high. As you can sort of see, this is very, very important to all of us here. How do we make our practice much more inclusive? How do we demonstrate inclusivity? The quote illustrates why communication has to be meaningful, engaging, and should strongly reflect an understanding of how we at the OU are required to understand the context first before engaging with Black students. Following on, here are a few examples which our Black colleagues at the OU suggested we should use to frame our support around. create a safe space by maintaining confidentiality, be non-judgmental, be objective, and involve the art of deep and active listening. This is so crucial to the conversations we have. Have patience, give people time to think and talk. Give people the opportunities and so on in terms of making errors and getting them to gather their thoughts without putting them on the spot. Starting conversations. How are you feeling? Are you okay? And building from this, it's the tone and manner which makes the difference. Conversation should be direct, factual, moving from the general to the specific. Listen to the words the student is using and mirror the same language and terms. Use engaging sentences to open conversations by asking, how does XXX impact on your studies? Further moving on, use of the words depression and anxiety. These are relatable terms for some, but not for all of our students. Labels can be stigmatizing. From this, you're now leading on to support. What can I do to help you? Do you feel you need some time out? And it's okay to ask those questions. Understand the context. Mental health may be talked widely in the UK, but not necessarily within Black communities due to stigma, acceptance of it, people's experiences. Mixed race or mixed heritage students may have a different experience of discussing mental health. They may feel that they have to take a side. The term mental health is viewed as derogatory and is seen as negative. There's no doubts about that. That was coming quite strongly through in our research. Avoid using any words which are negative, display anger, angry, manic, calm. Make sure our conversation's not defensive and confrontational. So these are what bits I was going to cover. I'm going to pass you over to my colleague, Grace.
Thank you, Khadija.
This is just plugging into what Khadija has just spoken about. And it's not just about us developing a leaflet or information for staff to use. As a group, we also, based on the research and also the staff interviews that Manny spoke about earlier, we also put together some recommendation that can be put in place by the university to help staff in kind of providing the support to Black students in the declaration of their mental health. But the key thing that I would like to point out was it was noted that this recommendation has to be implemented along with the output from the other work packages that Darren mentioned earlier on, because it's important that all of this recommendation is put in place to enable us to provide the robust support that staff will need in terms of providing support to students in the declaration of their mental health. And this recommendation, like I mentioned earlier, is both from the research that we did as a group, and which is led by Mandy that just spoke earlier, and also in terms of the staff interview and the survey that we gathered from. The first thing that was noted, a key recommendation for the organization, is the diversity in mental health student support. And this is not just about diversity in terms of having just Black mental health support advisors. Is also key. The key thing here is the lived experience for student. Having someone that has a lived experience is really, really helpful. It was noted that students are more likely to connect to someone that shares some of their cultural and religious experience. As Patrice noted earlier, that role model student needs to have to be able to see a role model and be able to relate more to them. So this is really key. The recommendation was this is a key first step in terms of moving towards that. And one of the other things that was noted both in the research and in the interview is about training for the mental health support advisor. Is really critical that culture and language barrier training is made mandatory. And the reason for this is it links to it what you can see on that, which is the practical improvement in language, is that having the appropriate training for a mental health support advisor will enable them to be able to interpret the resources given to them in the right way. Like what Patrice said earlier, being in a different country, a new country, you probably come in with your own different values, your own different experience. So it's really important that this training help our mental health support advisor to be able to interpret the resources in the right way, especially when dealing with Black students, to be able to translate it also for them in the right way. Because the first step in providing the right support is to be able to understand what is required, and then you'll be able to know what you can give. So the key recommendation is that this training and make mandatory. It should not be optional, because that would give staff the resources and the language and the knowledge to be able to have all the necessary things to support the student. So we are hoping that this recommendation, along with other recommendation, would help staff in providing the right support. Again, this link into what Patrice said earlier, showcasing other student stories, is really important that we bring our student stories to the top front. So this go hand in hand with all of our mental health resources, materials. Again, like what Darren said earlier, we've got different work packages. So I think there's a work package that's even looking into doing animation, voiceover. But the key thing is about using student voice for students to be able to see other fellow Black students so that they can feel like I'm not alone. This is a journey that we are all embarking on together, especially because our faith needs are different as humans, and also our religious needs are different. So having student voice showcased across all of our materials in the service that we offer in the mental health support would really enable students to declare more and open up more to feel like this is a safe environment. So this is another key recommendation that was noted from the research and the interview that would help make it different. And one of the things that we'll also talk about is Manley mentioned earlier that institutional understanding, and it was noted that it cannot just, there's multiple things to be put in place. So funding needs to be put in place dedicated to this, because it cannot just be one approach. Like Khadija talked earlier about that first person centered approach, but it's not just one approach, it has to be multiple. So one of the key recommendations here is actually the varied approach, so that staff can have enough in their box to be able to support students, and that will come with institutional understanding and funding and resources. So like what Darren said, this is not a quick, it's a long-term objective, but the key thing is actually putting the right funding in place to be able to get there. And like lastly, just to talk about something that Manley mentioned earlier, is also in terms of the organization as a whole. The research pointed out that there is the university in itself is there's whiteness in the university, so diversity in staff is really, really key in order to address, again, it goes back to lived experience, in order to address and reduce experience of racial and discrimination, because most of the time we do know is about discussing, having an open platform to behave, and the only way to do that is people to actually share their experience, and experience can come if you've lived it rather than reading about it. So that's another recommendation in increasing the ethnicity diversity of the staff. And lastly, I just want to point out with what I said earlier, that all of this recommendation is important and the organization implement it along with the other work package, because just implementing one in isolation would not give an effective result. So implementing it with along the other work package will make it different. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you. We're now going to invite Darren once more so that Darren can just give us a quick plug for our seminar in December. Darren, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So much powerful work that our colleagues have done and presented to you today. So I really commend it to you and thank them for all of their efforts. As Grace was saying, it's really important that we can blend together the work from the various work packages. I know we've got Rahana in the room, who's the chair of our Task and Finish group, and collectively we'll look at those connections and how we bring that forward. So we've got our seminar in December. I said I would put the link in the chat. I admit to having messed up slightly, going back and checking. The seminar is 13th of December, but it's actually between 1 o'clock and 3 p.m. So I'm not going to share the link to the Eventbrite site because I haven't updated it yet. So my apologies, but I really would recommend that you come along. It's important that we can join up the work that's taking place at the university and also learn from others. So if you've got things to add, we'd very much like to hear from you. So thank you very much. Back to you, Patrice.
Thank you so much, Darren. It's really, really kind. So without further ado, we really do hope our presentation offered you, can't speak English anymore. I was too excited with all of what was going on. But yes, we hope it offered you some food for thought and progress to help support Black students and staff. And not just Black students and staff, but the whole BAME, so Black, Asian and minority ethnic cohort in a better way, to improve their mental health and their well-being concerns as well, so that it becomes a thing that we do at standard. You know, mental health shouldn't be something that we use as a dirty word. It shouldn't be something that we use as torture. It should be something that we all acknowledge, we all experience, and we should all have a valuable experience being here at this university, whether we're staff, students, or other. Okay, so that's just exactly why this whole presentation was important, and why my colleagues have gone through the trouble and work that they have. It's not to put a point out there and just to express Black History Month. It's to show that this stuff really does matter and we need to take it seriously.